Hello and welcome back to Behind the Pad podcast with me, Paulson and Victoria. So I took around about a 2 month break. I was quite burnt out and it had came up to the Nordic model in Scotland where Parliament was going to see if the bill would pass. And so there was a lot of media, there was a lot of nerves, it was very hectic and I honestly just couldn't focus. So that's why I haven't done anything for 2 months. I should be back to doing this weekly. I'm very excited. I will be doing an episode just where I talk about how Parliament was, but today we shall be talking about the 688 Postal Battalion. So, in the waning months of World War II, the 855 women of colour who comprised the 688th Central Postal Directory Battalion, 824 enlisted soldiers and 31 officers completed a time-sensitive mission. They only had 6 months in the European theatre of operations. Army leadership believed their success would be key to boosting morale amongst the 7 million war-weary American service members. US government personnel and the Red Cross workers stationed throughout Europe in 1945. You have to think a lot of men were going to war not realizing what was actually going to happen. There was so much propaganda about how amazing the war is and easy, and you didn't know the reality of war until you were in the pits. There were nearly 500,000 deaths between the years of 1941 to 1945 of just US soldiers. Lovers turned into widows without ever knowing what had come of their beloved, and mothers wept as they lost contact with their sons. The mission for the 688 was simple: to label, sort, and clear millions of pieces of mail, including letters, photographs, and gifts that had been stockpiled and left languishing in warehouses for months, even years. 17 million pieces of mail. One general predicted it would take 6 months to process the massive backlog of undelivered mail. Yet, the battalion, nicknamed 688, managed to do it in just 3. So, this is their story. The story of 688 Central Postal Directory Battalion is a tale of adventure, hard work, and success against all the odds. But it is also one of the incredible resilience and perseverance in the face of deeply entrenched racial and sex inequality. Though many of the women of the 688 joined the army for the opportunities it offered for travel, education, and a regular paycheck, the desire for social change remained a strong undercurrent that unified the individual women into a cohesive and resilient unit. Alice Dixon, a straight-talking former corporal with the 688 Battalion, said it most plainly as she reflected on her experience as a young woman. Quote, "We're all human, whether black, white, red, or brown, and we all have something to offer." The 688's achievements are remarkable, considering the fraught social and political climate of the time. Indeed, the women of the 688 Postal Directory Battalion proved to be pioneers in military service during an era when racial segregation was law and few opportunities were available to women to work outside the domestic sphere. Now, I really wanted to do this story after watching the 6888 movie. It was recently on Netflix, and I just wanted to dive deeper. And I do, I know I'm just a podcast, but I do have listeners, and I wanted people to learn about them and understand the history and realize that they didn't get enough credit and they were massively, massively shamed upon and snobbed at. The 6888 had 855 women and was led by Major Charity Adams. It was the only black and multi-ethnic U.S. Women's Army Corps unit sent overseas during World War II. The group motto was, quote, "No male, low morale." The battalion was organized into 5 companies: Headquarters and Companies A, B, C, and D. Most of the 6888 worked as postal clerks, but others were cooks, mechanics, and held other support positions, so that the 6888 was a self-sufficient unit. Women are very self-sufficient. Men during this time were very sexist. Even if you were white, you still were seen as a household maid and belonged in the kitchen. The scrutiny was even worse if you didn't fit the mold of what a man envisioned a woman being. You were done for. You had no chance. Quite simply put, a lot of racists. Like it was just so normal to be a dick, to be racist so blatantly. It was I couldn't imagine how horrible it was. And we still haven't fully gotten rid of racism in 2026. But that's a different story. Educational and employment opportunities remained limited for women in the 1940s, and especially so for African American women. Racial biases, segregation policies, and dehumanizing indignities, particularly in the South, created daunting barriers to women seeking jobs outside the domestic sphere. Even those who completed their education and were qualified for teaching or other professional jobs found it difficult to find appropriate positions open to them. Thus, joining the Women's Army Corps was an attractive option for many women seeking education, economic stability, and a bit of adventure. The war also offered an opportunity to demonstrate their patriotism and contribute to, quote, women's uplift. As Bethune had called her efforts to improve the lives of black women, we're going to go even more into who Bethune was later on. Elaine Bennett joined the WAC, quote, because I wanted to prove to myself and maybe to the world that we, African Americans, would give what we had back to the United States as a confirmation that we were full-fledged citizens. Essie Woods joined the army for similar reasons. Quote, I guess we got patriotic, carried away, and we enlisted. And so that's really how it was. That feeling of wanting to do something. End quote. Ultimately, it is estimated that 150,000 women served in the WAAC/WAC during the war, about 4% of whom were African American. While most women were placed in administrative and clerical positions, many also served as cooks, chauffeurs, and mechanics, among a wide variety of other non-combatant jobs. During World War II, there was a shortage of soldiers who could manage the postal service for the U.S. Army overseas. In 1944, Mary McLeod Bethune worked to get the support of the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt for, quote, a role for black women in the war overseas. Black newspapers, too, challenged the U.S. Army to, quote, use black women in meaningful Army jobs. So let's take a detour. I really want to highlight who the amazing Mary McLeod Bethune was. She was born July 10th, 1875. She was an American educator, a philanthropist, humanitarian, womanist, and civil rights activist. Bethune founded the National Council of Negro Women in 1935 and proceeded to establish the Afro-American Women's Journal, which was the flagship journal of the organization. She presided over other African American women's organizations, including the National Association for Colored Women. Bethune became the first black woman to lead a federal agency when she was appointed by President Franklin Roosevelt as the secretary to lead the National Youth Association, NYA. She started a private school for African American students, which later became Bethune-Cookman University. She was the only African American woman to hold an official position with the U.S. delegation that created the United Nations Charter. McLeod also held a leadership position for the American Women's Voluntary Services, which was founded by Alice Throckmorton McLean. Bethune wrote prolifically, publishing in 7 periodicals from 1924 to 1955. Mary McLeod Bethune joined the Equal Suffrage League, which was an organization branched off of the National Association of Colored Women in 1912. The Southeastern Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, eventually renamed as the Southeastern Association of Colored Women's Clubs, elected Bethune as president after its first conference in 1920 at the Tuskegee Institute. They intended to reach out to Southern women, specifically white women, for support and unity in gathering rights for black women. The women met in Memphis, Tennessee, to discuss interracial problems. Bethune also served as the president of the Southeastern Federation of Colored Women's Clubs from 1920 to 1925, which worked to improve opportunities for black women. In 1935, Bethune founded the National Council of Negro Women, NCNW, in New York City, bringing together representatives of 28 different organizations to work to improve the lives of black women and their communities. Bethune said of the council, the National Youth Administration, NYA, was a federal agency created under Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration, WPA. It provided programs specifically to promote relief and employment for young people. It focused on unemployed citizens aged 16 to 25 years who were not in school. Bethune lobbied the organization so aggressively and effectively for minority involvement that she earned a full-time staff position in 1936 as an assistant. She co-founded the United Negro College Fund, UNCF, on April 25, 1944, with William J. Trent and Frederick D. Patterson. The UNCF is a program which gives many different scholarships, mentors, and job opportunities to African American and other minority students attending any of the 37 historically black colleges and universities. Bethune helped with its initial fundraising efforts, which gathered around $900,000 in just 6 months. Bethune continued to refer philanthropists to the fund, and she joined the board of directors in 1952. After working on the presidential campaign for Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, she was appointed as a national advisor and worked with Roosevelt to create the Federal Council on Colored Affairs, also known as the Black Cabinet. Honors included the designation of her home in Daytona Beach, Florida, as a Natural Historic Landmark, and a 1974 statue as, quote, the first monument to honor an African American and a woman in a public park in Washington, D.C. So now we go back to the story of the 6888. The women who signed up went to basic training in Georgia. Women who were already in the WAC, like Alice Dixon, served at various locations, including the Pentagon, before they joined the 6888. Once they entered service, black WACs faced segregation, racism, and retaliation. Often, the women were assigned to menial tasks despite extensive training or education. One woman, Vera Knapp, was accepted into the WAC as in the Auxiliary Aircraft Warning Service. She underwent 7 months of extra training for her new role. However, after completing training, she was told that, quote, Negro enrollment in the Aircraft Warning Service of the WAC was not presently being accepted. Other women documented open racism from their white superior officers. One white WAC at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, was quoted as saying, quote, I don't want any black WACs as medical technicians. They are here to mop walls, scrub floors, and do the dirty work. This, quote, dirty work resulted in several black WACs being demoted from medical technician to orderly, despite their training and background. 4 women who disobeyed orders and refused to do the work of an orderly were dishonorably discharged and sentenced to 1 year of hard labor. Thankfully, the Judge Advocate General Office of Boston voided the case less than a month later. Despite diverse backgrounds, members of the 6888 shared the experience of being stigmatized as women of color in a predominantly white male institution. African American men and later white women were regularly deployed overseas. But black WACs were kept out of these assignments until targeted political pressure forced the War Department to reverse its stance. Political motives alone, however, do not explain the excitement these women felt about going overseas. Many were still in their teens and 20s and had experienced little outside their hometowns or home states, and so they were eager to see another part of the world. Members of the 6888 assembled at the Extended Field Service Battalion, 3rd WAC Training Center, Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, to receive training and to be outfitted for overseas duty. Training was comprehensive and intense. Gladys Carter remembers, quote, We had to climb ropes and come down the side of a ship as would if it was sinking. We had to do some crawling under wire. We had to put on gas masks. So that was part of it. A lot of marching and just getting ready, getting outfitted, that kind of thing. End quote. However, none of the women were told what their assignments would be, where they were going, or when they were going to leave. All of the women thought highly of their battalion commander, Major Charity Adams. Even if they had not trained under her, they knew of her because she was one of the two highest ranking African American women in uniform at that time. After Battalion Commander Charity Adams and her executive officer, Captain Abby Noel Campbell's departure to Europe, members of the 6888 followed in two waves. The 6888 left the United States on February 3rd, 1945, sailing on the fast liner Isle de France, and arriving in Greenock near Glasgow on February 12th. The Isle de France encountered several German U-boats on the trip, forcing the ship to take evasive maneuvers, but reached Scotland safely. The battalion was transported by train to Birmingham. On February 15th, the unit was inspected and marched in review before Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, Commanding General, Communications Zone, European Theatre of Operations, ETO, and Major General Robert McGowan Littlejohn, Chief Quartermaster, ETO, whose responsibilities including the mail. Nearly 2 months later, the second contingent of WACs arrived in England. Conditions were harsh in Birmingham. Yes, Birmingham. I couldn't imagine it's any better from what it is now. With the women working around the clock in 3 8-hour shifts in the cold and dimly lit warehouses where several million pieces of mail were stacked from floor to ceiling. Now keep in mind that they had no idea what they were doing until basically when they got there. They had no idea that this is what they're doing? Sorting mail? Some of the mail was mildewed or had been picked over by rats looking for the bits of food that had been wrapped and sent by loved ones to their soldiers overseas. To process the mail, the soldiers updated and maintained millions of locator cards containing the serial numbers and location of all American personnel stationed in Europe. They became detectives searching envelopes for clues to determine the intended recipient. As Adams recalled, quote, after a few weeks on the job, some of the women had developed great skill in putting the packages back together. Now you have to remember, everybody was against these women. All the lieutenants, the colonels, everybody kind of honestly set them up to try and fail. In a way, they kind of wanted them to fail so they could just laugh even more and scrutinize and be racist against women of color. They didn't actually think they'd do it. The 6888 devised their own system to handle the backlog of mail. This included creating and maintaining a card index, which ultimately contained 7 million cards of people with the same or similar names, using military serial numbers to distinguish between them. The 6888 worked 7 days a week in 3 shifts to process and deliver mail to troops fighting in Europe. Each shift handled an estimated 65,000 pieces of mail. In total, the unit handled mail for over 4 million military, and civilian personnel, and cleared backlogs in the UK and France. Through hard work and dedication to getting the war fighters their mail, the 6888 cleared the backlog in Britain in only 3 months. In May 1945, the battalion sailed across the English Channel to help with another mail backlog. They would head to Rouen, France, where a mail jam contained correspondence that was up to 3 years old. Though the task may have seemed daunting, by October 1945, the battalion had cleared it, and they were moved to Paris. Myrtle Rodin recalled, "We found the same condition in France that we had found in England. The mail had been held for months. There was mail that was 2 or 3 years old. In France, the women worked alongside French civilians and German POWs, prisoners of war, to accomplish their objective. The new recruits found the work challenging as non-native English speakers. Despite the challenge, the women cleared the backlog in 5 months. The arrival of a significant number of American women on the continent attracted the attention of both white and black servicemen, who, quote, suddenly found that they had business in Rouen, according to Adams. Of their time in France, Adams further recalled, quote, "We enjoyed visiting the other towns and villages. There were all sorts of festivals." End quote. The unit was able to also be able to participate in recreational activities including tennis, ping pong, softball, and basketball. On February 27, 1946, the remaining soldiers in the unit boarded the Claymount Victory for return to the United States. The unit was disbanded at Fort Dix, New Jersey, without any further ceremony. Members of the unit received the European African Middle Eastern Campaign Medal, the Women's Army Corps Service Medal, and the World War II Victory Medal. The 6888 weren't met with celebrations in the streets. Nothing like that. It was like people had forgotten about all the mail. There was hardly any thanks. There was many challenges in the 6888 that they had to learn how to navigate, overcome, and defeat. Early on in the operation, a general attempted to send an officer to, quote, tell them how to do it right. But Major Adams responded, quote, "Sir, over my dead body, sir." By the time the same general visited the unit in France, his attitude had changed, and he appreciated the 6888's accomplishments. The battalion finished what was supposed to be a 6-month task in 3 months in May of 1945. The battalion lived and worked in temporary wooden buildings at King Edward's School in Edgbaston, which had been requisitioned in 1939 by the British War Office for use by the British and US armies. The 32 officers lived in 3 houses opposite, and because the 6888 was a segregated unit, the women slept and ate in different locations from the white male soldiers. Cold weather when they arrived meant the women had to wear coats and extra clothes when working in the unheated temporary buildings. There was evidence of sexist and racist treatment by male soldiers. Some of the women felt that the European local people treated them better than people did in the United States. A male chaplain working at Birmingham caused problems for Adams, ordering her soldiers to report to his office to help him and be counseled instead of reporting to work, causing them to be considered absent without leave, AWOL. Adams had to, quote, counsel him to leave the women alone, quote, reminding him that she was in charge of the women's assignments. World War II marked a turning point in the status of radical minorities and women in the United States Armed Services. The critical need for personnel during World War II was a major driving force behind overdue changes in race and sex policies in the military and other American institutions. Their achievements might not have been celebrated with victory parades or a public recognition of their service, but their accomplishments encouraged the General Board, United States Forces European Theatre, to adopt the following in their study of the Women's Army Corps. Quote, the National Security Program is the joint responsibility of all American, irrespective of color or sex. The continued use of color along with white, female military personnel is required in such strength as proportionally appropriate. In recent years, the 688 have received renewed attention due to the women themselves, their family members who have dedicated themselves to preserving their legacy. In 1989, Charity Adams early published their memoir, quote, One Woman's Army, about her service. In addition, members have taken part in unions and public recognitions honoring their achievements. On February 25th, 2009, the battalion was honored at the Women in Military Service for American Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. The event was attended by 3 former members of the 688, Alice Dixon, Mary Ragland, and Gladys Schuster Carter. Dixon and Ragland were also honored by President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama in 2009. On March 15, 2016, the 688 Central Postal Directory Battalion was inducted into the U.S. Army Women's Foundation Hall of Fame. Battalion veteran Elise Garris attended the induction ceremony. On November 30th, 2018, Fort Leavenworth dedicated a monument to the women of the 688. 5 women from the battalion, Mabel Campbell, Elizabeth Johnson, Leanne King, Anna Robertson, and Dolores Rudock, were present at the dedication. In 2018, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, dedicated a monument to the 688. The following year, the unit was awarded a Meritorious Unit Commendation. In March 2022, the 855 women assigned to the 688 Central Postal Directory Battalion were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. Signed into public law by President Joe Biden, the 688 Congressional Gold Medal Act of 2021 recognizes the outstanding achievements of the battalion, not only for the successful completion of their mission at the end of World War II, but for their sustained collective pursuit of racial and sex equality in the face of significant social and political barriers. Speaking of the 688, retired Colonel Edna W. Cummings declared, the Congressional Gold Medal is the nation's gratitude for the 688 Battalion and the thousands of African American women who served in the Army during World War II. Their service will never be forgotten as soldiers and trailblazers for gender and racial equality. On May 13th, 2019, US Ambassador to the UK, Woody Johnson, presented a blue plaque to King Edward School to commemorate the 688's achievements while in Birmingham. The plaque is now on the itinerary of guided tours organised by Birmingham's Black Heritage Walks Network. On February 12, 2021, U.S. Senators Jerry Moran and Jackie Rosen introduced bipartisan legislation to award the Congressional Gold Medal, who were assigned to the 6888. Representative Gwen Moore inducted the companion legislation in the House, where it passed unanimously. President Biden signed the bill on March 14, 2022. Living members of the battalion were honored in their hometowns. On April 27, 2023, Fort Lee, Virginia became Fort Gregg Adams in a ceremony that renamed the base after two black officers whose struggle paved the way for a more inclusive military. Lieutenant General Arthur Gregg and Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams. Gregg, the first African American to achieve such a high rank, retired in 1981 after serving as the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff, Logistics. At the resignation ceremony, Major General Mark similarly stated, quote, "They led with dignity, they looked the part, they maintained their composure, and they led by example. In short, these two epitomize the professional qualities we seek in every leader who wears the uniform of the United States Army." 1 year later, the U.S. Army Women's Museum on Fort Gregg Adams opened a new exhibit on the 6888. Quote, "Courage to Deliver, the women of the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion was created in partnership with descendants of the unit. One speaker at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the exhibit summed up the unit's exemplary work. Quote, "They fired no shots, and they fought no battles, and yet their courage and their dedication achieved a different kind of victory." Almost 80 years later, the 6,888th continues to stand as a testament to the outstanding achievements of Black women soldiers throughout U.S. Army history. Only 5 members survived until 2024. Gladys E. Blunt, Ramay Davis, Fannie McClendon, Lynette King, and Anna Mae Robertson. Now, there were women who did lose their lives in the 6888, and they were Mary H. Bankston, Mary Jewel Barlow, Dolores Mercedes Brown. Bankston and Barlow died at the scene of a Jeep accident on July 8th, 1945. Sergeant Dolores M. Brown succumbed to her injuries 5 days later on July 13th, 1945. These 3 women are buried at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial in Colleville-sur-Mer, France. They are among only 4 American women buried in that cemetery, which holds more than 9,000 graves. Because the War Department did not cover funeral costs for these women at the time, their comrades in the 6888 raised funds to ensure they were laid to rest with proper honors. Now, I hope everybody has enjoyed listening to this podcast episode about the 6888 Postal Battalion. They were all amazing women who will definitely always go down in history as helping pave the way for Black and multi-ethnic women in not just the army, but in the world. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Pulse and Victoria. If you have enjoyed this episode, then please leave a like and review and go check out my other links. Alright, bye!